Manipulation. Today I'm going to teach you how to manipulate people to get what you want. In today's world, people use each other all the time for positive and negative reasons, and to some extent, we even use our own friends in our daily lives. It just depends on your perspective. Basically, not knowing how to manipulate places you at a disadvantage in life. The webtoon Aman'sman is a perfect guideline for learning manipulation. For context, Aman'sman is a story about Yuhan as he becomes the youngest CEO of Hansan, a successful electronics company built on toxic work culture. Despite this achievement, nobody he knows cares about this to celebrate with him. After a night of drinking and wondering if he could change the past, he wakes up the next morning 20 years younger at the beginning of his career. Armed with the experience and insight that made him the CEO, Yuhan begins to revisit the broken relationships and battles that enables Hansan cutthroat work culture. Yuan and his manager Choi are waiting for a meeting at Ha Yuan's Motors, and as the meeting starts, Yuan introduces himself to Joe from the sales team, who was very rude in response. As Choi starts the meeting and explains the product Hansan is working on, Joe complains that the sales team from Hansan isn't there, and she explains how their internal process works. Then Joe pulls out their so-called trump card, which is a malfunctioning test product given to Yuan. Joe starts to even gaslight Cho as she explains that this isn't their fault. Yuan realizes someone put him up to this to cause problems and wait for the right time to strike as Joe keeps digging himself into a hole. As Choi debunks that the resolution is a problem, Joe brings up a screen transition. This is where Choi thinks it's her team's fault, but Yuan points out this is a problem with the chip that Hunan developed. Joe starts to fumble and says, "We can't allow this like a child." And at this point, Yuhan realizes that Joe is taking orders from someone else and that he's not going to give the go-ahead to work with Hong Song. Yuhan trying to figure out how he's going to use Joe to his advantage and turn him into a human chess piece. A small lunch break occurs, and Yuhan points out to Cho that maybe they are trying to work for another company and trying to weasel their way out of this agreement. As Yuhan is outside, he decides to make a call to a friend he met at a work function. During the phone call, Yuhan realizes in a flashback that Seogil is a weak point to Joe. As Yuhan and Choi walk back inside the building, Yuhan hears Joe's conversation. This is where his plan begins. Yuhan uses his knowledge of Joe's personality to his advantage. Yuhan decides to interrupt the conversation, saying lunch is almost up. Joe loses his composure, saying, "How dare a newbie like you butt into a discussion between superiors." Right at that moment, Dobbin, the girl Yuan is talking to on the phone, walks in and says, "What's going on here?" Joe tries to cover up his tracks, but Dobbin brings up that'd be tragic if Seogyu hears about this after she's been talking about you in a good light. After this, Joe desperately tells Yuan that this is a misunderstanding as Seogyu walks into the room. And at this point, we see a quick flashback of Joe trying to get with Seogil. Each time he gets more and more desperate. Going back to the present, we see Joel is giving a look to Yuan that reads, "Just help me out here, man." Yuan decides to support Joe by explaining how he's a great guy who helps with the development of panels and how he's great to his coworkers. And when lunch is almost over, Seogil begins to depart, but before leaving, he tells Joe that he's a nice guy, leaving him with appearance he thinks he sells a shot. And at this point, I'm laughing my ass off because not only was this staged by Yuan, this man thinks he has a chance of getting Wasilga, so he'll continue to shoot a shot and continue to make desperate attempts. And using that against him, Joe decides to agree to work on the panel so they exceed in their endeavors. But what happens afterwards to Joe is that when he says this to his boss gets extremely upset because that wasn't the plan. Now they have to agree to work or send an email to get out of this. And that was the video, Aman'sman. It was pretty fun to talk about this webtoon and finding this creative way to talk about it. I'll have to do it more future stories that I do enjoy. And until then, next time, guys.